kind of reaction to the economic condition of the United States. And I've talked, a lot of people don't quite recognize and see how important the debt and the deficit is with respect to how it's ultimately going to lead to socialism, as it has every single time in history when you've had a free voting democracy, a representative democracy that becomes encumbered with too much debt. So Nick, if you'll pull up this chart, I'll just show you a microcosm of it and specifically how it played out in New York and how it will continue to play out in cities. This is the total amount of student loan debt. In the last 20 years, the student loan debt has ballooned from 500 billion to 2 trillion. 4 million college graduates per year in the United States, about 40% of them have student loan debt that they leave. That means that in the last 20 years, 80 million people, young people, have graduated from college, and they've accrued $1.5 trillion of new debt. And based on the percentage and the distribution, that means the average debt for these individuals is sitting around $60,000. So you're a young person. Where do those young people go? Where do they live? And remember, there's about 32 million of them. They live in cities. They don't go back to rural towns. Most of that population sits in cities. It sits in New York, sits in Los Angeles, sits in Seattle, sits in San Francisco, sits in Portland, and sits in Chicago. And what we're seeing in those cities is a massive political shift. People call it left, but it's actually quite different than just being more traditionally left. It's really a revolution against the system that brought them to this moment. Because the promise that we gave in America, the American dream, was if you will go to college, you will graduate, you will have income, you will have stability, you will be able to buy a home. And what we did is we increased the government's role in making that dream possible. And in doing so, we created effectively a system where we gave unrestricted access to capital, which inflated the cost of education. People could go to school like Zoran and major in African studies at Bowdoin College. They could get a loan and graduate with $200,000, $300,000 of debt and then never get a job. The guy has not had a real job. And this is the truth for 32 million young Americans. They find themselves living in places where they cannot afford to pay their bills every month, and they will never get out of the debt cycle that they were thrust into and believe that they were going to be able to graduate from and excel in the world and increase. They all have what is called negative capital. They have debt and they will never be able to get out of that cycle. So where do you turn in that moment? You don't go turn to corporations to solve your problems. You don't go turn to your friends and your siblings and your family. They're not going to bail you out. You turn to the voting booth and you hear a guy like Zoran show up and say there can be a better path forward. The better path forward is the government can and should do more to help. And in doing more to help, we will increase government. We will tax the rich. We will tax the corporations. We will take all of that capital and we will redistribute it in the form of services and checks and support for all of the people that find themselves unable to take care of themselves. And this becomes a tipping point when the majority of the voter base ends up in that situation where they're that deeply in need, where they have negative capital. And that is the situation America finds itself in today. There is no easy answer and there is no easy solution out of this. But I can tell you one thing for sure, that in historical perspective, we have seen it time and time again across dozens of countries that have embraced socialism to get out of the debt cycle that ultimately absorbs and swallows up the young. It swallows up every family. It swallows up every person in the working class with debt. They're swaddled with it, and they all try and get out of it by increasing government and embracing these socialist concepts, and it has never, ever worked. More government is not the answer. Less government is. We can get into that. But if you look at the results, Zoran won 61 to 39 with college educated. Young people voted for him. Old people did not as much. White people voted for him because they went to college. Non-white people did not as much. At the end of the day, young, college educated white people elected this guy. And that is the beginning of a wave that will sweep over America. And I really do worry about where this takes us. So,
way to go, dummies.
Yeah, I mean, you're correct. He won amongst Asians, whites, college education. Did you vote for Biden or DeSantis?
As I go through the list of things I'm most concerned about in the world today, number one is the debt and spending cycle of the federal government in the U.S. I think it's the most kind of scary set of facts and conditions that we're getting set up for kind of a major crisis 10 to 15 years from now. Because you can't afford all the debt that we've taken on as a country, as well as the entitlement, as well as defense. And so something's got to give. And there's a bunch of paths that could emerge from that set of conditions that are all really scary paths and not good. I'm more concerned about that than I am about nuclear war or climate change, just to be clear, because I think that the social effects and the global geopolitical effects that arise from the U.S. kind of destructuring because of our debt and spending cycle that we're in right now are far more significant than what we'll experience over the same period of time. And again, I do think that technology is going to resolve a lot of our issues with climate change, and I think nuclear war, cool heads will prevail. Everyone's got a family. So that's what I'm most concerned about. So any kind of voting decision I make is made with that lens, which is what's the best path to supporting some sort
fiscal
of
responsibility,
setback or step back to resolve those issues. As Charlie Munger said so well in this interview that was published this week, and I've said it a few times on the show, but he's a much better speaker than I. Uses far fewer words. But in democracy, eventually the populace realizes they can vote themselves all the money. And, that's what we see happen in an accelerated way in Latin America. We've seen that with a lot of these democracies that ultimately resolve to kind of socialism. And in the US, we're seeing a lot of this behavior where we're kind of voting ourselves all the money. We're putting in place politicians and the populace is saying, I want, and more money comes out. And it totally decreases the strength and the resiliency of our nation and our economy. And it's the most concerning thing to me because the incredible innovation and economic engine that is the United States is threatened, and it really threatens a lot of stability in the world today.
Chamath, any final thoughts here?
The price of services goes up and the value of the dollars goes down, which means that the value of your savings, the value of the stuff you own goes down. And this is particularly true for the majority of Americans who are not big asset holders, right? They only have more than half of Americans, can't pull together $1,000 for an emergency. So if the value of dollars go down and their incomes aren't going up, they're deeply hurt by that. People that own a lot of stuff can take their assets and they can buy inflation hedged securities or inflation hedged assets. Like you could go buy timberland, you could buy gold, or you could buy Bitcoin, which a lot of people argue is a great inflation hedge now. And those assets, because they're fixed in supply, they will go up in dollar-denominated terms. And so wealthy people can handle inflation. The majority of other people cannot. And inflation really hurts the economic growth because now people spend less, they have less money to spend, and businesses shrink and things go bankrupt. So inflationary cycles are very damaging to economic cycles.
Okay, so we have a thing that happened.
Income isn't going up as an individual. I'm not making more money, but this guy's got $200 billion. That's unfair. I think the world is made up of haves and have-nots. Everyone thinks that they're a have-not relative to some other have. And everyone is a have to some other have-not. That simple fact is what drives all social policy, all of politics, all of the economy, everything. Because it goes back to my point about desire. If I'm a have-not relative to someone else's have, I see what they have that I don't have. I want to tax them. I want to get them. I want to compete with them in the market if I am an entrepreneur. I want to go get the market share they have. I want to get a politician to take their stuff away from them. And if I'm a have, and there's a have-not trying to get me, I want to vote for a politician that's going to protect my assets. And I want to vote for a politician that's going to give me freedom to continue to have stuff. And I'm going to have conflict with the person that is a have-not that says that they want to have what I have, because it's my thing. It's not their thing. I worked hard for it. I deserve it. So that dynamic is what drives all of this. And I think it goes back to the point earlier about government spending. The have-nots vote to get what the haves have or to take stuff away from the haves. And then the government is the agent by which we can all accumulate our power to exercise that action. That's where government programs come from. And the haves are viewed as bad by the have-nots, particularly as it relates to individuals with wealth, when individuals are not seeing their income grow. And so today, unfortunately, I think successful entrepreneurs are cast in a negative light generally. Elon has gotten challenges America faces is government programs create an anchor. They are a shackle. They hold people back when they're supposed to be support payments. And the problem with this that this article highlights is that the supposed support payments actually create an incentive or a challenge in moving up the rung or up the ladder. It's probably the case that it is a lot easier to move up the income ladder if you're in certain parts of the country than if you're in most of the country. And so most of the country is stagnating wages, but they still feel the effects of inflation. And these government programs keep them stuck in the position that they're in. This is the spiral of socialism. The government programs that are meant to provide support to people require an increase in taxation. That revenue has to come from somewhere. That taxation ultimately leads to an attrition.
They all move down to Florida to avoid our tax rates, and that's just really cleaning out the base of New York and all the rest of it.
To follow up on Ben, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like something that's really important about what you just said is it's not a binary switch that gets flipped. You're socialist or you're not. What happens is these policies where you have big government policies that provide greater and greater economic, financial, and social support to the population are slow burning policies. The big policies in the federal government started 50 years ago, and they've gotten bigger and bigger. It's a snowball effect because when they're not working, if I'm not getting enough money in the food stamp program, for example, the solution isn't, hey, let's cut the food stamp program. The solution is, let's make the food stamp program bigger. When rent control didn't work in San Francisco to bring housing prices down, the solution was, let's get the government to start building housing. The solution is never, let's reduce the government's role. The solution is unidirectional, which is to get the government to do more to solve the failings of the policies. So whatever policies he does enact, if they don't work, the answer and the response from that socialist type movement will be, let's do more, let's have the government do more. And then you increase the burden on the people because you end up increasing taxation, increasing regulatory burdens. And as he said in one of his interviews, ultimately you seize the means of production. And that's the end goal of his government.
It's so simple to solve this problem. I hate to make it too difficult here, but if we had the super funds like in Australia and people...
That is it's insane. And yes, it will drive people away from wherever entity's doing that.
The thing I worry about is that it's very hard to cut spending on the flip side, Adam. By my estimate, more than half of Americans rely on a government check, either directly or indirectly. So you're either employed by the federal, state, or local government or its agencies, or one of its contractors, or you're receiving one of the retirement checks from a government agency. And so it's become very difficult because a majority of the population is receiving benefit or living from some sort of government flow of capital, which makes it very hard from a democracy perspective to say, hey, I'm going to vote to change that. Who would vote to cut their own income?
Right. You take like the retirement age, you go, look,
spiral of socialism. The government programs that are meant to provide support to people require an increase in taxation. That revenue has to come from somewhere. That taxation ultimately leads to an attrition of economic value in that region. And then you have to increase taxation more, and then you end up in this spiral. And we're seeing this now, not just in New York, where Mamdani is proposing to increase taxes, but across the entire West Coast. We talked about the 5% billionaire tax that's being proposed as a constitutional amendment to go on the ballot in November. There's also a major challenge underway in Oregon where the governor is now trying to figure out how to keep businesses in the state. The CEO of Columbia Sportswear, one of the biggest employers in the state, came out this week saying that his advisors have recommended that he leave the state. And in Washington, there is a proposed bill right now to implement a 5% tax on the payroll of employees making over $125,000 per year. And Microsoft, Amazon, Costco, and some of the other big employers in that state are now trying to figure out what they should do. And in California, as you guys know, in the last couple of quarters, Tesla, Chevron, McKesson, Oracle, Charles Schwab, CB Richard Ellis, Hewlett Packard have all left the state. Palantir, SpaceX, I could go down this list. Because as the tax burden becomes too high on those companies and there's an alternative to them in the country, they'll leave. And then you have this spiral that happens where the people that are in that state say, wait a second, there's no jobs, there's no income gain, we need to increase taxation, and the tax bills get passed. Norway, 2022, passed a wealth tax. The wealth tax was supposed to raise $146 million of incremental revenue per year. Instead, what happened? $54 billion of net worth left the country, and they actually had a $448 million tax loss. The taxes declined rather than
Did they reverse it afterwards or no?
I'm actually not sure of the state of Norway. Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, donor dollars, if they even consider proposing that. So
yeah, it is a very interesting approach. What do you think about Milei in Argentina?
I love that guy. That guy's the man. I need that guy. I really want to meet that guy.
That makes two of us, by the way.
Yeah, that guy speaks truth to power. And what's amazing, I wonder if he is the beginning of the tipping of the policy and the systems that we just talked about, and the challenges that arise from the way that we have voted and the way that we have allowed government to grow and intertwine itself in markets and intertwine itself in individual lives in the way that we have. That Argentina's recovery from that and the voters saying, we want this guy, is a way to indicate that maybe things are tipping. In El Salvador, they put all the cartel members in prison.
Yeah.
And made Bitcoin a national currency. I think it's a national currency now, right? And so I think that there is maybe this moment where Milei is looked upon as the guy that speaks truth, not just to power, but to the individuals that now have access through social media and the internet and the ability to hear these sorts of voices clean and true on what we have done, what we have done to ourselves. And the term socialist is so deeply upsetting to people when you use that term, but socialized policies that provide massive social programs at the cost of taxation, which ultimately inflates things because the government's involvement distorts market forces, makes things more expensive. He's shown people that there is a way to recover from that and fix it and get out of it. And now he's shutting down these wasteful bureaucracies in the government in Argentina. He's shutting down these groups that should have never been created, these programs that should have never been created because they don't create much benefit for people. There's no accountability in how the money is spending. The cost does not justify the ends. And I think he's showing by example that this economy can grow, that people can prosper, that the government can run a surplus, and people can be taken care of without the wasteful nonsense that's gone on, the tentacles that have grown out of politicians standing on platforms saying, I'm going to make everything in the vending machine free. And what happens from that after 50 years, 100 years? Buenos Aires was like the Paris of the West. And it was the highest GDP per capita of anywhere in the world.
Whoa.
At the turn of the 20th century or late 19th century. It was this, go look at photos of Buenos Aires at this time, or not photos, artistic images. It was like this metropolis, this burgeoning industrial system. And social policies crept into Argentina like they did throughout Latin America in the 20th century. And there was multiple coups, multiple eradication of the free market system that allowed Buenos Aires to become what it had become, what Argentina had become in the late 19th, early 20th century. And then I think this guy came along and said, people were sick of it. They'd been through the pain. The US doesn't know pain. We have no idea. We could go through another 30 years of this sort of inflation to come close to what Argentinians have been dealing with over the last 30, 50 years. So I think that there's a breaking point where people are like, we need something different. These systems don't work. And he could be showing people the future. He's come from the future. I was joking with my friends the other day. I feel like he's Superman.
Bears. Nobody's happy now. Friedberg, your thoughts on this sort of, you kind of predicted it with the socialist side, but it does feel like
my prediction
everybody's unhappy.
My prediction will ring truer than any of us hope. Socialism will sweep over this nation, I fear. And I think it's a cancer. And it's going to be worse than what we saw with woke stuff. It's going to be just I'm losing out on everything. I mean, people are stagnant in wage growth. There is no one in the United States, including wealthy people, who haven't taken significant notice of the increased cost of groceries and the increased cost of buying home goods. Jason, I'm assuming you must have noticed as well how much groceries have gone up in price. Everyone's rent goes up every year. There was this TikTok rant that went viral this week about this woman that's like, why does my rent go up every year? My salary doesn't go up. We're in this really difficult moment because of what Ben pointed out, which is that we've basically funded the government to do everything for us. And by my calculation from last year, I think nearly half of Americans are employed directly or indirectly by the government at this point. And as a result, because of that and the inefficiency of government allocation of capital, everything inflates in cost. And we're entering this era where some people make the joke that the train has left the station.
All right, let's finish up with these two charts here, Phil, on energy, and then I want to get into tariff.
I just want to say one thing to David.
The tech jobs are going to leave Washington State if this payroll tax gets passed. And this is the cycle that's underway. And it starts with the government spending. If we didn't have the government spending the way it does, where the government's running a deficit, California is now expected to have a $50 billion plus deficit, then they don't need to increase taxes. And this is the core motivation. Once you're hooked on the government for some sort of benefit, it's very hard to unhook yourself. It's very hard for a company or a union or an organization to unhook themselves. And it definitionally becomes a spiral. You will not give up that benefit. And so you have to spend incrementally more and more and more and more. And as you raise taxes, you end up losing the tax base and it becomes a deficit spiral. That's what leads to socialism. And we have seen it time and again. It's not a big revolution. It's not like we see where you go from socialism to democratic capitalism, where you have a revolution in the streets. Socialism emerges slowly. It's like a quiet sort of hum, and then it becomes a roar, and all of a sudden you're a frog in a pot and you don't realize you're being boiled. Pull this clip this is episode 7 of All In. I don't think democracies end with a bang. I think they end with a whimper. And I think that's been the case historically. And, no democracy has lasted. Our democracy in the US has lasted longer than many. Democracies ultimately enable freedom of operation and free markets that result in greater progress than any other governing system. The problem with progress is that progress is asymmetric. You have some people who progress at a much greater rate than most. And it is that delta that motivates the end of that system ultimately. While everyone in the United States, or the average and even the bottom quartile of the population in the US is better off than they were 50 years ago in terms of income and healthcare and shelter and access to food and access to all these things, the top 1% of the US is further ahead than...
How many generations of people that vilify the successful, well, then people aren't going to aspire to be the successful. So how do you think this plays out?
I could argue both sides. So I could say that we head down a socialist tunnel if we're not careful, where we want to make sure that everyone has equal outcome, which is what Milei warns against. When the reality is equal opportunity, everyone has access to participate is what really drives success and drives equality. And as long as there are some young people that will step out and build businesses and innovate and build new technology and participate, we do have enough of that spirit in the United States still. So I'm very optimistic about US entrepreneurism. I could be worried about the loud voice of the mass saying we need to revolt and return to a equal outcome. We need to get to an equal outcome society, and redistribute all the wealth and redistribute all the assets and redistribute all the access and so on. But I think that there's still enough young people that succeed through entrepreneurism that they can become beacons and lights for for making sure that folks don't fall that way. We need to shine light and support and applaud. So I don't have a great answer for you on this, because I think you could see things go either way. I mean, I think generally I have this worry that we're at this and this is a broader scope point, that we're at this very weird intersection of choosing between the Dark Ages and the Enlightenment, which I've said on my show, do we want to stop innovation because we're fearful of technology, because we're fearful of progress, because we're fearful of the downside, because we don't like entrepreneurs, because we don't want people to accumulate wealth, because we hate success, because we want the government to do stuff for us and not individual companies? That's the Dark Ages. And if that wins the day...
Why would that be the Dark Ages?
So, I'll just say another thing about this. One of the ways that this gets supported is the absence of empiricism, fact, data. Because as Milei points out, all the data shows that entrepreneurism, that capitalism is better than socialism. He said this The data is there. Economists will show you. You're not going to compel someone that socialism is better unless you leave out all the data that supports that capitalism is better. Okay? So you have to have an absence of information. I can wax a little too philosophical here because it ends up going on too much of a tangent, but I do think that there's this element of human beliefs that allow us to do incredible things. Like we have to come together and believe in something as a group to accomplish a mission, to build something. Like we all get together and like, let's build a house. I believe in the vision of that house, so I'm going to build that house with you. It takes more than one person to build that house. We all have to work together. So the belief allows us to accomplish the building of the house. But that also then opens up room for humans to believe in things that aren't empirical, that aren't supported by data, that maybe take us down a different path. And so we can believe that the data is right and good, or we can ignore the data and believe in something else. And so I do see a lot of alarming behavior, things that worry me, particularly on media and from politicians, where they say things that aren't true and then people believe them. That's what happened in the dark ages.
Stop investing.
It sucks, man. I think it sucks.
I think there's a clear path out. There is a clear path out. Solve the three big problems.
I think AI is a path. If it leverage into the hands of every person in the United States, in the world, if we get abundant free energy through new energy systems, and if we can extend human lifespan and health span, I think those are the three abundance vectors. And if those three vectors hit, I think all bets are off, and we can get out of this nasty spiral. But I do think we have the choice every day. Do we want to go into the Enlightenment, or do we want to go into the Dark Ages? I keep saying that.
Let's solve those three big problems. All right, listen. Another amazing episode of the All In Podcast.
I think Jake, I'll just announce he's running for president.